This is one of the very few times where someone under the age of 18 was put on death row. Sean Sellers was the first and only person executed for crimes that he committed when he was under the age of 17 after the reinstatement of the death penalty in the 1970s. This is a very controversial case. It sparked debates for decades, and I'm so interested to get your guys' opinions on it. Sean was born May 18th, 1969. His mother, Vonda, was only 16 years old when he was born, and his biological father was an unstable addict and a serial cheater. Sean was only a toddler when his biological father was no longer in the picture, and soon later, his mother married his stepdad, a trucker named Lee. Sean's stepfather was the only father he ever knew, but he was on the road for work a lot, and then his mother would go on the road with her new husband for weeks at a time, leaving her small son with family members or babysitters. Sean's parents also moved a lot for work, so by the time that Sean was 16 years old, he had moved 30 different times, and Sean would get little to no warning before a move. So Sean was alone a lot as a child. He definitely had a fear of abandonment. He also felt like he had no control over his life. He was always the weird new kid at school, and he never made any friends because what would be the point? And to make all of that worse, Sean also reportedly started hearing voices in his head by the time he was 6 years old. These voices would shout at him, criticize him, and his parents were never around long enough to see the damage that their absence was causing their son. Sean definitely was experiencing trauma, and you can tell this because he actually wet the bed into his early teen years. If he was staying with his uncle would make him wear a diaper to bed, and then if he soiled the diaper in the middle of the night, like he had an accident, his uncle would force him to wear the soiled diaper on his head to shame him. When Sean was little, his mom thought that he was the perfect child, but as he got older, she actually began to physically, verbally, and emotionally abuse him. Sean's stepdad thought that he was weak, so he actually forced him when he was 10 years old to go deer hunting with him to kind of man him up. And his stepdad thought that he was weak because he did not want to hurt these animals, but he would force him to do it anyways. And then afterwards, he would force Sean to do really disgusting things to the animals. At a very young age, Sean got interested in the occult, black magic, and Satanism. He thought that through Satanism, it would give him the power to control his life and also control others. But as he got more obsessed with these things, the voices in his head got worse. The voices would tell him really dark things and tell Sean to do terrible things. Before this, Sean was on the honor roll. He did sports. He was like any other teenage boy, but then his entire personality changed. He actually tried to tell his mom about these disturbing thoughts and the voices he was hearing, but allegedly his mom kind of just dismissed him. Sean also tried to tell 2 different teachers at school about these disturbing thoughts, but they didn't seem concerned either. And Sean also wrote an essay at school where he said that he thought he could kill someone and not feel any remorse afterwards. So Sean went to his best friend, Richard Howard, and told him about these dark, disturbing thoughts and feelings he was having, and his friend Richard actually told him that he also had dark fantasies, and this wasn't something that Sean should feel embarrassed about. This was actually really cool. So Sean, at only 16, has tried to tell 3 different adults about these disturbing thoughts he was having, and they all dismissed him. And then he told his best friend that he was having these disturbing thoughts, and his friend told him to embrace them. I'd imagine this would be really confusing. Sean also later stated that his friend Richard was more evil than him, and they would spend a lot of time together talking about all these disturbing dark fantasies and also doing satanic rituals. And then one day, Richard tells Sean that he hates his girlfriend's father and he wanted to kill him, and asked if Sean would help him, and Sean agreed. And then Richard said that he would only kill his girlfriend's father if Sean killed someone first, so they were both even, and Sean agreed. There was this one gas station in town, and Richard and Sean would go to this gas station a lot at night to buy snacks. There was always the same man working the midnight shift at the gas station, and that man was 32-year-old Robert Bauer. Since Sean and Richard were there so often, they kind of got cool with the guy. They were friendly. So one night the boys tried to buy beer even though they were only 16, and Robert denied them. And I guess this was enough for Robert to be Sean's victim, his human sacrifice. So on the evening of September 8th, 1985, Sean and Richard went to the Circle K gas station with Richard's grandfather's firearm. They actually spoke with Robert for a while they pretended to buy snacks like nothing was wrong. And then when there was no one else in the store, Sean fired at Robert multiple times while Richard blocked the exit. And then they ran out of the gas station, they sped away in their truck laughing, and for whatever reason, they decided against killing Richard's girlfriend's dad that evening. The gas station unfortunately had no security cameras, there were no leads, there was no evidence, there was no motive because nothing was stolen, so unfortunately the case went cold. And after this, Sean felt more confident. He thought that he had pleased the devil and the devil had given him power. He started a really serious relationship with a 15-year-old girl named Angel. It's honestly pretty ironic, a kid obsessed with the devil dating a girl named Angel. Angel was a troubled teen. She was seen as a bad girl, so Sean's mother did not approve of the relationship. She tried to ban Sean from seeing Angel and would say like a lot of mean things about her and call her a lot of mean names. Sean's mother, Vonda, wrote her son a 6-page letter telling him how much she loved him, how worried and concerned she was for him. But at that point, Sean only saw his mother as an obstacle and really resented her. So on the evening of March 5th, 1986, after doing one of his rituals, Sean, only 16 years old, shot his stepfather and his mother while they were asleep in bed. Sean then tried to stage the house like an intruder had broken in. He then went to his best friend Richard's house and confessed what he had just done to his parents. The next morning, both of them went back to Sean's house where Sean pretended to find his parents' bodies and then hysterically ran to his neighbor's house where his neighbor called the police. When investigators got there, they were almost immediately suspicious of Sean. They said that he wasn't acting right. Also, the scene looked obviously staged. I mean, nothing was stolen. So they brought Sean and Richard into questioning. Almost immediately, Richard told them everything. So Sean confessed to all 3 murders. During Sean's trial, his best friend Richard actually testified against him in a plea deal so he wouldn't also be charged with murder. And Sean's defense tried to blame his mental health and also the fact that he was into Satanism. Something I find really odd is apparently the jury wasn't made aware that Sean was only 16 at the time of the murders, and also apparently in Oklahoma at the time, life without the possibility of parole wasn't an option. So when it came to sentencing Sean, it was either sentence him to life with the possibility of parole in 15 years or the death penalty. So Sean Sellers was sentenced to death row at the age of 17 years old for the crimes he committed when he was 16. He is one of 22 people to be sentenced to the death penalty for crimes committed before the age of 18, and he's the first and only person to ever be sentenced to the death penalty for crimes committed before the age of 17 after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. So this was obviously really controversial, and no one really knew how to feel about it. Behind bars, Sean converted to Christianity. He showed a lot of remorse. He did a lot of interviews, including with Oprah. He tried to appeal his sentence multiple times, but was ultimately executed on February 4th, 1999. And then about 6 years after Sean's execution, the Supreme Court actually ruled that it was unconstitutional to execute people for crimes they committed under the age of 18. I find this case so fascinating. I'm so interested to get your guys' opinions on it. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting discussion in the comment section. Do you think this was unconstitutional? Do you think that they made the right choice and he deserved the death penalty for the crimes that he did commit? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Until then, I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another video. Is there a serial killer that is more terrifying than John Wayne Gacy? He's the killer clown, a master manipulator, was able to successfully live a double life, all while being one of America's most prolific serial killers. At one point, they even thought that he had the most confirmed victims out of any other serial killer in American history. John Wayne Gacy was the only son in his family of 5. His childhood has been described as being fairly normal, and I guess that's true if you compare him to the childhoods of other serial killers, but his father was still very much an abusive, violent alcoholic who took his violence primarily out on his only son, John. Because of this, John's mother was really overprotective, but then his father would say that she was going to turn him into a mama's boy and a queer. John Wayne Gacy definitely questioned and struggled with his sexuality for most of his life, but honestly, he was just really interested in the idea of sleeping with people. The idea fascinated him. When he was very young, his sister actually found a pair of their mother's undergarments that John had stolen. As John Wayne Gacy got older, he had a very normal life. He got married, he had 2 kids, he was running multiple businesses, he was really into politics, the Democratic Party. Everyone liked John Wayne Gacy. His own father actually apologized to him and told him that he had been wrong about him all along. By the late 1960s, John Wayne Gacy had created the perfect life, but it was all a lie. He was obsessed with teenage boys. He would only employ teenage boys. He would invite them over to his house, show them adult content, and give them alcohol. And then in 1968, when John was 26 years old, a 15-year-old boy reported to the police that John had essayed him. John was arrested. His family and community were shocked. John claimed that he was innocent and said that he was being framed by the Republican Party. And since the only evidence against him was his 15-year-old boy that was going to testify against him in the trial, John actually hired another teenage boy to go beat up that boy, scare him, and threaten him out of testifying. But that boy stood his ground. Good for him. He reported this attack and this threat to the police. John was charged with more crimes, and then he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife promptly divorced him, took the kids, and John never saw any of them ever again. And oh my god, this is so infuriating, but despite being sentenced to an entire decade behind bars, John Wayne Gacy was released on parole only 18 months later. And within 6 months of being released, John was accused of essaying another teenage boy, but those charges were dropped because that boy never showed up to testify, and I can only imagine why. And about 2 years after that, John would take the life of his first victim. And now that he was out of jail, he moved, he got a new wife, he opened up a new business, and went right back to hiring a bunch of teenage boys. Now that he's created this brand new life, John Wayne Gacy went right back to being extremely well liked. And I cannot stress this enough, how convincing John Wayne Gacy was at creating this double life for himself. He was a successful businessman, a family man, a pillar of the community. He was everyone's friend. He would host the best parties. He would show up to every community event, all while being one of America's most prolific serial killers. John Wayne Gacy even spent his weekends volunteering his time as a volunteer clown. He was not being paid, but he would dress up as Pogo the Clown and do children's birthday parties, charity events, and also go to children's hospitals. And knowing what we know now, the fact that he was dressing up as a clown and doing all these children's birthday parties while killing a bunch of underage boys is extremely terrifying. But back then, before anyone knew any of this, it was just another reason why John Wayne Gacy was the nicest guy ever. In 1972, John Wayne Gacy took the life of his first victim, a 16-year-old boy named Timothy McCoy, that he picked up and brought back to his house while his wife was out of town. Who knows what they did that night, but the next morning, John said that he woke up and this 16-year-old boy was standing in his room holding a sharp weapon that he had gotten from the kitchen. So he didn't know how to react. He just got up, attacked the boy, got the weapon from him, and then used the sharp weapon on the boy repeatedly until he passed away. It wasn't until after he killed the 16-year-old boy that John Wayne Gacy realized his mistake. In the kitchen, breakfast had been prepared by Timothy. He set the table for two. Timothy was not trying to hurt John Wayne Gacy. He was trying to wake him up so they could have breakfast together. He just so happened to be holding this kitchen utensil when he did it. John Wayne Gacy buried Timothy's body in the crawlspace of the home that he shared with his wife, and then after this, teenage boys and young men were disappearing one after the other after the other. And some of these boys were actually employees of John. John was questioned multiple times. They never did a background check on him, and he was always able to talk himself out of any suspicion. In 1976, he divorced his second wife, and with her out of the picture and out of the house, he went on a killing spree. He was burying all his victims in the crawlspace of his home, under the floor of his house, or in the backyard. And when he felt like he was running out of space, he started disposing their bodies in a nearby river. And since it was the 70s and a lot of these boys didn't come from the best homes or didn't really have a lot of family, when they were being reported missing, the police were just disregarding them as runaways and did not investigate. Until December of 1976, when 15-year-old Robert Peace disappeared after he told his mother that he was going to go meet up with John Wayne Gacy to discuss a potential job. 15-year-old Robert was on the honor roll. He was a good kid. He wasn't the type to go and run away. So his disappearance was going to be properly investigated. There were a lot of witnesses that saw that John Wayne Gacy was the last person with Robert before he disappeared. So the police decided to finally do a background check on John Wayne Gacy and saw that he had been previously convicted of assailing a teenage boy. With this information, they got a search warrant for his home. When they searched his home, they did not find Robert, but they found handcuffs, duct tape, rope, an 18-inch adult toy, and a bunch of driver's license that belonged to teenage boys that had been reported missing. John Wayne Gacy was put on 24/7 surveillance. There were officers whose entire job was just to follow his every single move, but John felt really confident. He was really friendly with the surveillance officers, so one day when one of the surveillance officers asked if they could use John's bathroom, he said it'd be fine. The second that officer said that he got in John's bathroom that was connected to the crawl space, he said that it reeked of death. He knew there had to be at least one body in this house. That officer told John that he was going to be coming back with a second search warrant, and I think John realized that the jig was up. He went to his lawyers and he confessed to them that he tortured, essayed, and killed over 30 young men. And John Wayne Gacy was arrested at the age of 36. He made a full confession and even helped the investigators find all of his victims. After digging up the entire home and property of John Wayne Gacy, 29 bodies were found on the property and another 4 were found in the rivers outside of Chicago. Not all of his victims had been identified, but the ones that have been identified are so young. All of them are between the ages of 14 years old and 21 years old. And what will really make you mad, because I know it pisses me off, is that all of his victims that we know of were killed within that 10-year span that John Wayne Gacy was supposed to be behind bars for his first offense when he essayed that boy back in 1968. If they had never released him early on parole after only 18 months, all 33 of these men's lives would not have been stolen in such a brutal, senseless way. John Wayne Gacy pled not guilty by reason of insanity, but he was found guilty on all 33 charges of murder and sentenced to the death penalty. He tried to appeal this multiple times, but it did not work. While he awaited his execution, he became a painter and started painting clowns. The day before he was executed, he saw his sister and they took this photo. And then in May of 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed while a crowd of people cheered in the streets outside. 4 of John Wayne Gacy's victims have yet to be identified, but they have been identifying his victims as recently as 2021. So there is still hope that these men will have their names back one day. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments and let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I cannot believe that October is almost over. I will see you guys tomorrow with another video, a Halloween video. Until then, I love you guys so much. Every single evil thing that you could do to another human being, he's probably done them. A terrifying serial killer that you've likely never heard of, Richard Chase, also known as the Dracula Killer or the Vampire of Sacramento. It's October, it's spooky season. All month, you guys have been begging me to cover the most terrifying true crime cases I know, and all I can say is be careful what you ask for, because the crimes that this man committed are some of the most gruesome, horrific, and brutal that we have ever covered. This is not the video that you guys are going to want to eat during while you watch. So we don't know too much about Richard's childhood. He was in Boy Scouts, he did Little League, and honestly things seemed pretty normal until he was around 10 years old, when he began to torture and kill animals. As a teenager, Richard began to experiment with mind-altering substances, but he still seemed and looked like a normal dude. He had friends, he had a couple girlfriends, but he wasn't able to keep any of these relationships going for very long because Richard had trouble performing in the bedroom. As Richard went from a teenager into his early adult life, he thought that maybe he couldn't get it up because he didn't have enough blood in his body. So he actually began to drink the blood from little bunny rabbits that he stole and killed from a bunny farm near his house. These were definitely like the first really major red flags that there was something wrong with Richard, that he was suffering with some kind of mental illness, and this was the beginning of Richard's rapid declining mental health. So every single day, Richard was drinking the blood of bunnies. He was eating them raw. He was also using a blender to make smoothies made from bunny organs and Coca-Cola. At 25 years old, Richard was actually hospitalized because he had a blood infection, because he was actually injecting himself with rabbit blood, because at this time he actually convinced himself that he needed this blood to live and it was healing him. Because at this time he was like a hypochondriac. He was very paranoid and very anxious. He thought that he didn't have enough blood in his body, that his heart was not beating sometimes, that his stomach was upside down, and these are just to name a few of the things that he thought. He also believed that the bones in his skull were moving around, or more bones were just growing out the back of his head. And he believed that all these things could be healed if he just drank blood. I also read this and I thought that this was just kind of silly. Richard did not think that he was getting enough vitamin C, so he would just walk around with like an orange, like the fruit, on his head because he thought that the vitamin C would absorb into his brain. It's clearly just completely unhinged. So Richard was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital. At the hospital, Richard was stealing the blood from therapy dogs. He would also open up windows, hang out the windows so he could rip birds that were flying in the sky, like rip them out of the sky, and then he would rip them open with his bare hands so he could drink the blood of these birds. I guess the staff at the hospital thought this was really amusing because they nicknamed Richard Dracula. So despite all of this really concerning behavior, Richard was only at this hospital for 5 months before the hospital released him. Some staff at the hospital were really adamant against Richard's release because they thought that Richard was a danger to himself and others, and obviously they were really right. Also at this time, Richard was just like not taking care of himself at all. Like he used to be like conventionally attractive, and then he just like stopped any kind of hygiene, stopped brushing his teeth or showering. And pretty much as soon as Richard was released, he escalated from torturing, killing, drinking, eating bunnies to the dogs and cats of his own neighbors. And if he was unable to steal one of his neighbor's pets and he felt like he needed to because the bones in his head were moving, he would just go buy a dog or a cat. And there was one time where he actually bought 2 puppies to do these horrific things to. He was actually so out of his mind that there was this one point where he actually called one of his neighbors to let them know that he had just stolen their dog out of their backyard and he had, like ate and drank it already. There was also one point that Richard brought a cat to his mother's house. When his mother opened the front door, he dropped the cat in front of her and then ripped it open with his bare hands. And no one is reporting all these like really unhinged things that this clearly sick man is doing. Like at one point he got caught by police driving around in a car that was completely covered in blood on the inside and the outside, and they just released him after they found out that the blood was just that of animals. Because no one was reporting the unhinged things that Richard was doing, he was also able to buy firearms. And Richard was using these firearms without a care in the world, just open fire while he's driving by in drive-by shootings. And this is actually how Richard took his first known victim, who was a husband and father of 2 named Ambrose Griffin, and he was just helping his wife take in groceries when Richard just drove by and shot him. It's also around this time that Richard began to escalate again, and he began to break into just people's houses, not to rob them, just purely to scare them. But Richard would only break into people's houses if the door was unlocked, because he thought that that was like an invitation that he was allowed in, and if the door was locked, that meant he was not welcome. So this is your reminder to go make sure that your doors are locked right now. This is how Richard broke into the home of David and Teresa Wallen. So David was actually supposed to be home, but he was late getting home from work because his car had broken down on the way home, leaving his wife Teresa, who was 3 months pregnant at the time, home alone when Richard walked in. Richard shot Teresa 3 times, which unalived her instantly. He then dragged her body into the bedroom where he essayed her body. Richard then began to dissect her, doing experiments on her and her unborn child, drinking her blood, bathing in her blood, just entirely horrific, brutal scene. And then when he was done, he just left her body there for her husband to come home and find. It was less than 1 week later, Richard broke into the home of Evelyn Miriff through her unlocked back door. At the time, Evelyn was home with her 6-year-old son, Jason, her 22-month-old nephew, David, and also her neighbor, Dan Meredith. Richard shot and killed all 4 of them in the home. He did the same horrific, brutal things to Evelyn's body that he had done to Teresa's body. He then fled the home with the body of the 22-month-old David. Back in his apartment, he did awful, disgusting things to the body of the 22-month-old infant before dumping David's partial remains in a cardboard box near a church, like the baby was trash. So the investigators were luckily able to find out that the same firearm was being used at all of these crimes, even these drive-by shootings. The FBI got involved, like the BAU from like Criminal Minds. They were able to put out a profile of the man that they were looking for, and it worked. They started getting tips that, you might want to be looking into Richard Chase, this unhinged man who's eating his neighbor's pets and driving around in a car full of blood. When Richard was arrested at his apartment, the apartment was just completely disgusting, just foul. There was blood and body parts in every single room. Every single part of the kitchen had blood on it. Like every eating utensil, we're talking like spoons, forks, bowls, plates, everything had blood on it. Of course, they found his blender that he used to make smoothies, which apparently he never washed once. Like I would actually get sick if I was an officer at this scene. The sicko also in his kitchen had a pile of pet collars from the pets of his neighbors that he stole and ate. Somehow Richard was found competent to stand trial, and while at his trial he tried to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, which I honestly feel like could have worked. I feel like this man is very much out of his mind, but he was found guilty and he was sentenced to the death penalty, but not long later he actually ended up unaliving himself behind bars. If you watched this video, thank you so much. You are a brave one. I'm actually really surprised that this case isn't more well known, that more people don't know about Richard Case, but maybe it's because it's too disgusting to learn about. Let me know all your thoughts and opinions in the comments. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. But until then, I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow with yet another crazy case. This is the case of the real-life jigsaw killer, where in 2009, body parts were being found all around England. Since it's October, you guys have been asking me to cover the most horrific, terrifying true crime cases out there, so be careful what you guys ask for. I've got a long list ready. On the morning of March 22nd, 2009, a farmer found a mysterious duffel bag just abandoned on his property. Inside the bag was something wrapped in plastic and duct tape that the farmer described as being large and squishy. The authorities were quickly called to the grisly discovery. Inside of the bag was the left leg of a human being. And then 1 week later, about a 35-minute drive from the first discovery, a second gruesome discovery was found. A forearm, elbow to wrist, was just found on the side of the road. And then 2 days later, another discovery was found. This was about 100 miles away, and this is so terrifying. It was a head, but the head was missing its ears, the eyes were removed, the nose was removed, the mouth was removed, pretty much all identifying features. The only thing left was the person's teeth. And at this point, the fact that there's been body parts just being found all across England is a huge media story. Literally everyone is talking about this. There's mass panic for everyone throughout the UK. They are living a real life horror movie. And this is really horrific and wrong and really gonna piss a lot of you guys off, but at this point the media starts referring to the victim as Jigsaw Man because he was missing so many pieces. And about a week later, the right leg was found about a mile away from where the left leg was found, and this leg was also wrapped in plastic and duct tape. And then 4 days after that, a suitcase was found abandoned in a ditch. And just imagine the fear of walking your dog and finding this after weeks of people finding body parts in bags, and then you just see a suitcase abandoned in a ditch. And what really gets me is that everyone just keeps opening these bags that they're finding, even though it's been spread all across the media that people are finding body parts in bags. Could not have been me. If I found a suitcase in a ditch and people have been finding body parts all across the country, would not have opened the bag, but the man that was just walking his dog and found the suitcase did open the bag. Inside the bag was a torso and also another arm. They were able to determine that the victim had died by being stabbed to death. They also could determine that all of the body parts that had been found belonged to the same victim and that the victim was male, but they were unable to identify the victim because his DNA was not in the system. It's been 3 weeks of people finding body parts throughout the entire country. There's mass panic and investigators have zero leads. They have no answers for anyone. They can't even identify the victim, even though at this point they pretty much have an entire body. They have no choice but to beg the public for help. Does anyone know of a man in their life, a loved one that's been missing for about a month? They end up getting a lot of leads of people thinking that maybe their loved one could be this potential victim, this Jigsaw Man, but none of the leads were really panning out. Either the height would be wrong, the person would have identifying tattoos or different identifying markings, the race would be wrong, how long the person had been missing didn't really line up, until they got a call from a mother whose son had mysteriously disappeared about a month ago, and that man was named Jeffrey Howe. See, Jeffrey was the kind of guy with a heart of gold who was constantly keeping in touch with his friends and family, so when he just randomly went MIA for a month, people were really concerned. So investigators went to Jeffrey's house to see if maybe he's there, if there's any leads. While Jeffrey was not there, there were two people living in his house. Inside of the home was a 38-year-old man named Stephen Marshall and his 21-year-old girlfriend. Stephen introduced himself as a co-worker of Jeffrey's, and he said that he had been down on his luck, so Jeffrey allowed him to live with him rent-free until he got back on his feet. Stephen and his girlfriend also did not seem concerned at all that their roommate had been missing for a month. They never reported him missing, tried to find out where he was, and they also said that they had no idea where he could possibly be. Stephen and Sarah were both brought in for questioning, and both of them were being seriously uncooperative. They weren't asking any questions, but that was fine because investigators really wanted to get them out of the house so they could search Jeffrey's house. Investigators said that the house was suspiciously clean, but there wasn't really any other evidence, so they actually started to rip up the carpet, which I'm not even sure is something that you can do without probable cause, but it was a good thing that they did it because they ended up finding large amount of bloodstains in the bathroom and in the bedroom. It was clear that a murder had taken place here by the sheer amount of blood that they were able to find under the carpet, but they still needed to identify Jeffrey as their dismembered victim, which they luckily were able to do with his dental records. But they also needed to prove that Jeffrey's roommates, Stephen and Sarah, were the ones that committed this murder because these were their prime suspects at this point. So apparently there were green fibers that were stuck in the duct tape that had been wrapped around some of the body parts. So inside of Jeffrey's home, they start just taking anything that's green and made of fabric so they can test it with these green fibers, and they did get a match on a shirt that belonged to Stephen. So it wasn't looking good. So Stephen and Sarah were both arrested, and then they needed to find a motive, and they quickly found one, which was money. In the days after killing Jeffrey Howe, Stephen and Sarah sold a lot of his belongings and also were charging things on his credit cards. So through the money that they got from selling his belongings and also the charges on his credit card, Stephen and Sarah stole about $5,000 from Jeffrey. This is a man that let them live with him rent-free, and he lost his life for $5,000. That was all Jeffrey Howe was worth to these two evil people. And Stephen and Sarah, who were boyfriend and girlfriend before this, tried to turn on each other, blame the other one, said that the other one killed Jeffrey, but eventually they both did plead guilty for their roles in this crime. Before their sentencing, both Stephen and Sarah were given an opportunity to address the court, speak to the judge. Most people use this opportunity to apologize, show remorse, even blame their actions on their terrible childhood, but that's not what Stephen does. Stephen just gets up and says, "This is not the first time I've done this before." I'm assuming that he just wanted to clear his conscience or something, because he just gets up and admits to the court that he had previously worked for a gang, and his job in the gang was to dismember and dispose of the gang's victims. Stephen was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 36 years, and Sarah was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months, so she is out right now living as a free woman. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much. Please let me know what terrifying true crime case you want to hear for the month of October. I already have a long list, but I'm always looking for recommendations. Please let me know your thoughts on this jigsaw killer case, and I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another terrifying October themed case. The teacher that was having an affair with a 15-year-old student and then convinced him to kill her husband. The case of Pamela Smart is a woozy, and you're gonna feel like I'm telling you the plot of a Lifetime movie. Pamela met Greg Smart in 1986 while she was in college, and Pamela liked Greg because she thought that he looked like a rock star. After Pamela graduated college, the couple moved to New Hampshire, they bought a condo, they got a dog, and they married in May of 1989. People thought that they were the perfect couple, but after only being married for a few months, Greg confessed to his wife that he had been unfaithful. Pamela says that the news devastated her, but she was determined to make their marriage work, and she became an almost workaholic to distract herself. Pamela was a media director for the local high school, and because Pamela was young, she was only 22 years old, she was pretty, she was really into rock music and metal music, the students really liked Pamela, and Pamela really liked the students back. On May 1st, 1990, which would have been almost Pamela and Greg's first wedding anniversary, Pamela Smart came home from a board meeting at the high school and found her husband, 24-year-old Greg Smart, lying dead on the floor of their condo. Pamela was hysterical. She ran to a neighbor for help, and that neighbor called 911. When police arrived, at first they thought that the scene was like a robbery gone wrong, but when they looked a little bit closer, they realized that the scene had been staged. There was no forced entry, there was no sign of a struggle, And there were a lot of valuable items and Greg's wallet that hadn't been stolen. And Greg's now widow, Pamela, was not acting the way you would expect a woman who just came home and found her husband dead to be acting. She wasn't showing a lot of emotion, and she was rubbing people the wrong way with some of the comments that she was making. Like when she was given a TV interview to talk about her husband's death, she mentioned to the people that were working at the news station that she always wanted to be on TV. But Pamela Smart had a rock-solid alibi. She was at that meeting at school, and a lot of people saw her there. But the investigators still felt like she had been involved. And then investigators got some information that absolutely broke the case. An anonymous caller said that some of the boys, the students at the high school that Pamela worked at, were telling people that they were involved in Greg's murder. They were almost bragging about it. And one of those boys had actually been sleeping with Pamela. The anonymous caller also said that a girl named Celia Pierce knows everything before hanging up. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. We're gonna rewind a little bit to before Greg's murder. So Pamela, she's working at this high school. She's 22 years old. She's super young. She's outgoing. She's cool, easy, breezy, beautiful, all that jazz. Pamela was allowed to choose one student intern, and that was 15-year-old Celia Pierce. All of the students liked Pamela. They always wanted to hang out in her office and talk to her. But Pamela, who's an adult, working at the high school, did not understand appropriate boundaries. The 22-year-old Pamela and her student intern, the 15-year-old Celia Pierce, would call each other's best friend, which in itself is already so wildly inappropriate, but to make it worse, the two of them would be hanging out outside school all the time. But this was not the only student that Pamela was hanging out with, because she was having an affair with the 15-year-old Billy Flynn. And I chose to use the quotations around affair because this is a predatory relationship. Obviously, Billy is in high school, he is a minor, he's 15 years old, and Pamela is in a position of power working at the high school. The 22-year-old Pamela and the 15-year-old Billy began their relationship in the late 1989, early 1990. Billy had never even slept with anyone before, and now here's this beautiful, smart, older woman that likes him. And she would tell him that her husband was a lousy cheater, that he was abusive, that she was so unhappy in the marriage, but if she divorced him, that he would take everything from her. After Pamela slept with Billy for the first time, his first time ever, Billy says that the next morning, Pamela tried to break up with him. She said that they couldn't be together anymore. Her husband would find out, he would divorce her, take everything, and if Billy wanted to be with her, then he would need to get rid of her husband. And then they started planning how they would get rid of Greg Smart, Pamela's husband. On May 1st, 1990, while Pamela was at that board meeting, The Perfect Alibi, two of Billy's friends, Vance and Raymond, were tasked with driving the getaway car, while Billy and his 16-year-old friend, Patrick Randall, waited inside of Pamela and Greg's condo for Greg to get home from work. When Greg walked through the door, Patrick and Billy rushed him. They got him on his knees. Patrick held a weapon up to his throat while Billy was behind him with another weapon and pulled the trigger. So after investigators got that tip that they should go talk to Pamela's student intern Celia, they went to talk to her and she immediately folded and told them everything. They also agreed as Pamela's best friend to get wired up and record Pamela's confession. And they were able to record Pamela making it very clear that she was aware of her husband's murder beforehand, and also Pamela trying to pressure Celia to lie for her. So with this information, a detective went to go confront Pamela. He told Pamela, "I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that I have solved your husband's murder, and the bad news is you are under arrest." Pamela denied any involvement, but all of her underage minor co-conspirators, they made a confession and they agreed to turn against Pamela, testify against her for a plea deal and a lighter sentence. There was so much media attention on this case. Everyone was talking about it. It was like the big news at the time because nothing had ever happened like this before, at least that like the general public knew about. What I find really weird, but I believe is probably just a product of the time because this was 1990, Pamela was never charged with statutory SA of Billy, and the media really portrayed her as more of like a promiscuous girl rather than a predator, and they really played up this like hot teacher angle. And because she was really into like rock music and metal music, whenever they would like talk about her on the news and show photos of her, they would play the song Hot for Teacher which is so disgusting and inappropriate. And when it was time for Pamela Smart's trial, it was the first murder trial ever to be televised. And it's actually been said to be like the first thing that like really sparked people's interest in true crime. Pamela Smart's trial was the hottest ticket in town. People were camping out all night to get a seat. During her trial, she continued to claim that she was innocent, and all of the children testified against her. And something that came out during the trial that I really wanted to add, I think it's really going to speak to Greg's character as a person. When Billy and Patrick had him on his knees, they attempted to rob him before taking his life, and they asked him to take off his wedding ring, and Greg told them that he couldn't give him the wedding ring because his wife would kill him. Pamela Smart was found guilty and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole at the age of 23 years old. Billy and Patrick were sentenced to life with the possibility of parole with good behavior, and the boys in the getaway car van was sentenced to 18 years to life, and Raymond was sentenced to 15 to 30 years. Raymond was released in 2003, and then 2 years after that, Van was released in 2005. And then Billy and Patrick were both released in 2015, and remember, Billy is actually the one that pulled the trigger and ended Greg's life. So all of those boys are out today. Pamela Smart has been in prison for 34 years now. She's in her 50s, and she has continued to deny any involvement. She says that she's innocent. She did not know that her husband was going to be killed. She said that Billy killed her husband because he wanted to be with her. But in this past July, she did come out and say that she does take responsibility for having an affair with Billy and then him killing her husband. And there are some people that do believe that Pamela is innocent, that Billy was the one to do this, and then he and his friends just blamed her so they could get a lighter sentence. And people have also noted that Celia, the student intern, ended up making like $100,000 selling this story to like a movie, so she had reason to lie, like financial gain. But if you're looking for my opinion, I 100% believe that Pamela is guilty as sin, but let me know what you think in the comments. While you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another video.